Alright, so we're back with Angular with Anson. This is going to be episode number 2. I'm going to show you guys how to use the CLI tool to pretty much create a component. It's actually fairly easy. So you want to go over to your terminal and just type ng. Just make sure you have the command working, because sometimes it might not work for you because you may have installed it incorrectly. Just make sure you install the Angular CLI tool globally. If you don't install globally, then you're going to have issues. So that's going to be very important, but it should work. Okay, so let's just type ng and let's type generate, and we're going to generate a component, and we're going to place this component inside, let's place inside components/users. Okay, and there you go. You can see that it created a new folder for us, and it actually created a new folder. Let me actually see if I can expand this. Yep, there you go. So components, it created 2 folders. So it can create components and it created users. And it places all of the files inside over here. Let's create another component. Let's do ng generate components. And let's do /components. And let's just do something like, I don't know, product. And you're going to see that it creates another folder and it has all the files in there. So you can actually see with Angular, they actually separate everything from each other. So for example, in React, you don't have any CLI tool. Well, I mean, they probably have third-party ones, but typically, so a lot of people tend to put their CSS either in the same file, or they put in a different file, or they use styled components. But by default, Angular actually places these into separate files. So it separates the HTML. Okay, it separates the view away from the actual, I guess you can call it a template, right? It separates the template away from the actual components where you have all the component logic, right? And then it separates the styling as well. With React, they use JSX to combine the JavaScript with the HTML, the JSX, and they combine it together to pretty much allow you to use just one individual file to pretty much create your component. In Angular, they separate everything from each other, okay, which is pretty nice. I personally don't mind it, but it does create a lot of files though, but that's fine. So there you go, that's how you create the component. And let's take a look at the users component. Let's take a look at our components. Let's see what happens. So you can see that whenever we generate our component, we have on the first line, we have the basic imports. Let me actually zoom out real quick or maximize this. So you can see we have import components, and then we have on init from Angular/core. Okay, that's the main Angular core library. We then have at component, and then you can see we have the selector. So this is the selector that we're going to need to use in order to actually render this into the DOM. Okay, you can change it if you want. So if I want, I can change to app user, but I'll leave it like that for now. We have the template URL, so which template we want to register with this component, which is going to be right over here. Okay, users.component.html. You have style URLs, so that's for the styling, okay? And then you also have your spec, your testing file. This is for unit tests, but we're not going to worry about that. Okay, now let's look at the after the component decorator. Remember, this is the component decorator. You're going to see this all the time, right? Every single component is going to have it, right? That's what tells Angular that this is a component. Okay, and you'll also notice that if we go into app.modules, automatically it actually adds these components into the declarations, okay, because they all belong in this ng module, okay? So that's also something nice with the CLI tool. All right, so one thing that we definitely need to talk about is the ng onInit method. So this is called a lifecycle hook. And basically this lifecycle hook is basically a way to tell us, Angular tells us that the entire component has been initialized. So all of the properties, everything, they're all ready to go. So for example, if I want to console log something in here, initialized, and if I want to, I can open up my DevTools, and you can see that in the console it says initialize right up top over here. Okay, so it's pretty cool. I like it. Let's go ahead and create a field. Let's just do public username, give it a string type, and let's set it to an empty string for now. Now in the first video, I actually set one of my fields in the app component to private. Don't do that, because if you do that, it will actually throw an error and it won't be able to, even though it was actually able to render it, I think it actually ended up giving me an error in the compiler. And when I reran the app, it actually didn't even work. So just make sure you don't set it to private. You could set it to private, but you won't be able to actually interpolate it, I think. It will give you an error. But let's go ahead and reference username now. So this right over here is our field, okay? And let's reference it by saying this.username. And let's set it to Anson. And now I'm going to console log this.username. Okay, and I'm also going to console log it in the constructor as well. Let's just see the difference. So let me make this a lot more nicer. I'll use template strings, so constructor, just so that we can kind of like see this a lot better. And we'll do ng on init. All right, let's see what happens. So let's open up our console. So you can see constructor that the value is empty. It's empty string. We initialize and look at the value now. Ng on init Anson. So there you go. That's pretty much ng on init right there for you. So ng on init is a great way to know when your component has been initialized. So for example, if you want to make some kind of HTTP request, you can do that inside ng on init. Whenever the component has been initialized, you can make an HTTP request, and then you can update the state, right? The state variable username. Okay, you can update the state of the component, and then you can basically alter whatever is currently being rendered in the template. So let's go ahead and right over here inside the HTML, let's go ahead and log, or not log, but let's render username. And let's save, and you'll notice that it says Anson. Okay, it says Anson. It doesn't say empty string, right? It's Anson. Okay, because basically once everything has been initialized, right, we're ready to go. Okay, so that's pretty much it with this basic component over here. We can do the same with, again, the other components. Well, we have the products component, right? It's the same concept. If I want to go ahead and render the products component, I can do that by getting the selector. So the convenient name, it's always prefixed with app hyphen and then the component name. So whatever you name your components, if it's named something like, products, it'll do app hyphen products. So let's go over to app.component.html, and let's go ahead and reference that. And there you go, products work. So that's pretty much the gist of creating components. Like, you can customize this however you want. So let's go ahead and end this tutorial with something simple. Let's go ahead and create some more fields. Public age number. Let's just set that to 0. Public, let's do email string. Let's set it to an empty string. Okay, now obviously you'd want to get all of this data from some API. So you'd want to, or your own API from a database, whatever. So you'd want to like make that HTTP request inside ng on init. But we're going to save that for another time. Okay, so let me just go ahead and initialize all these values. Let's do 30 for now. This.email equals anson@gmail.com. Okay, now if you try to reference the field without using the this keyword, it's actually going to give you an error. Okay, that's because we should be using the this keyword. Okay, now let's go over here, and I'll just simply wrap everything inside a div. And typically with components, you always want to make sure you have one root, one parent component, or not component, but the tag itself. So for example, you have a div, right? I usually call them containers. You don't want to have something like this, 2 divs, right? With good practices, you want to make sure you have everything inside one main container. And you can give an ID. So I'll just give this an ID. I'll just call this a users container. And what I'll do is I'm just simply going to, let me put this to the side. I'm just simply going to interpolate everything. So let's get the username. Let's get the age. Okay, and let's get the email. And there you go. We have our email, or wait, what's going on? Oh yeah, our name, username, age, email. And then we have the products component right underneath. So that's pretty cool. And then we can go inside the CSS file. We can reference the user's container, and we can give it some styling. So if I want, I can do something like width. I'm not going to go, super in depth, but I think you guys get the idea, right? I just wanted to show you guys how this could be done. So you can see there we have some width. And yeah, that is pretty much it with basic components. So now that you know how to create your own components, what's next? Well, what's next is you need to know how to do certain things such as dynamically render components. So let's say, for example, if you have like 10 users that you want to display onto the screen, how would you render all 10 of them? Rather than, doing something like this where you have div, 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 right? You'd want to be able to use some kind of, loop. In React, they have transforming arrays, like transforming data into JSX elements. In Angular, we're going to be using the ng-for directive to do that, and we'll actually do that in the next video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, leave a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you guys have any suggestions for upcoming videos, and I'll see you guys on my next one. Peace.